Ruud, I'll let you react to that, and then what I'd like to do is make this the last comment, and then let's open it up to the audience, because I'm sure you have questions for our terrific panel here.
I fully agree with Ryan. I think it has great benefits to have the IP ownership controlled centrally, and I see also some benefits of having a central organization managing that. Because first, if you have it all decentralized, each activity tends to do its own thing. And nowadays you have relationships with other companies coming out of the various businesses, and it would be good to have an overview what all the relationships are, so that you are aware of all the IP arrangements between these companies, all the IP issues that play a role there. It is also a benefit for the IP organization itself, because if you are only in one sector, then you tend to focus on only the business models and IP models that are dedicated to the sector. Right. But if you are together with other groups of people that are working in completely different market segments where completely different IP policies and strategies are applied, then these people can learn from them, and then they become more creative in developing IP solutions also for their businesses. So that I see also as a benefit. And another benefit that I see is that sometimes if businesses want to make shortcuts, and they have a tendency to sometimes to sacrifice long-term strategic issues, benefits, for short-term gains. And I think to be able to say, well, this is not what should be the case, should happen, that I think helps to have it centrally.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and there's really good, compelling reasons to have a centralized organization, but that raises the reverse challenge, which is if you're going to do that, then you really, and your other point, Ruud, is you've got to be closely integrated with the business. Absolutely. So if you're in a central organization like that, I think it's critically important that you find ways to reach out across the boundaries of that silo and make sure you're finding ways to integrate with the business strategy. Let's now open it up. This is a terrific opportunity for this audience to speak with the Jedi Council. So let me just settle a few ground rules about how we'll do this. Please stand, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're from, ask your question. We have microphones. That will make things a lot easier. And let's try to avoid speeches from the floor so we can hear from the folks up on the panel.
Thank you. My name is Christoph Haxel. I'm working for Matrix. It's a small company in Austria. But I'm just imagining the face of all the board members when you are entering the room and they just spoke about the sales and the profit margin of the last quarter, and now you are entering the room. Then the CEO will tell to you, well, we understand the value of your department, but we have a problem with the costs. Do you have this when you enter the boardroom, that you have this discussion that the CEOs are asking you? You told us that with 20% of the things you're doing, you create 80% of the value, that they just say, why you don't get rid of 80% of the things you're doing? Or they're talking to you, say, well, we see that we are number one filing patents in Europe. I think Philips is number one in Europe. And they don't see that you're number one in the profit margin. So you have discussions like that in your board meetings?
I think that's kind of directed to you, Ruud.
Yeah, sure. If you are operating as a business, and that's the way we are treated, then of course also the cost aspect plays a role. Because you have to show value, and as any other business, if you can achieve the same results with less cost, then they will ask you to reduce your cost. And that's what we are doing all the time ourselves as well, to say how can we increase the efficiency of our operations to achieve the same result with less money. And that's a matter of constantly working on those type of things. If you look at the IP cost, of course we try to optimize it in the way that we do it with as little cost as possible. That's our discussions that are happening all the time.
Just in terms of forecasting revenues, when I was at BTG, where our total business was patenting and licensing, we had exactly the same problem of how do you forecast revenues. We used to find that year on year, we would find we would do a risk-adjusted objective for our revenues, and we used to be plus or minus 1 or 2% usually. The mix was huge within that, and some things would be 100%, some things would be 0 because there'd be litigation, has a license deal been signed, and license deals can take a long time to come to fruition. That was in the short term. In the medium and long term, we had a number of litigations going. At one point, we had about 10 litigations going within the US, and in the US, it's a 5 to 7 year time scale. So we did a risk-adjusted probability set of trees, and we summed them by year. And for those 10 litigations, we were actually probably each year within 5% of the aggregate that we projected at year one.
So let me pose a question back to the audience, because I think the question that you're asking is, many organizations, IP organizations and companies are still cost centers as opposed to profit centers. The panel that we have selected here tends to be a place where IP is considered as a profit center, and there is real revenue, and so the business challenges are a little bit differently. But let me direct this back at the audience. For those of you who are actually in operating companies, in businesses, raise your hand if you are considered a cost center as opposed to a profit center. Okay? Now, not everybody here is in a business like that, so now raise your hand if you are considered in a operating business and considered a profit center. So what's your guess on the percentages there? It looked like 70-30 cost center to me, or 60-40 cost center to me. My guess is that's probably about right. Now, on the panel, I can tell you the answer to that question. It's 100% profit center. So the answers that you're getting here are going to be somewhat different than that. So I think that's a particular issue that the 60-70% of the folks that are here in operating companies where they still are considered cost centers face a slightly different kind of challenge than when you're generating hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue in royalties. The conversation, I think, is quite different.